Every team, every topic, everywhere. This is Believe.
Welcome to the Irish NFL Show on the Believe Network, brought to you in association with QuinBet. Well, the 2026-27 season is now almost upon us, and we've seen every team in the league play some form of football, with the pre-season schedule now well underway. Joint practice is also taking place between some teams, including the Bills and the Browns, who go at it in camp this week. Some exciting rookies, some new signings got reps over the last couple of days, in alongside the usual host of second and third stringers and undrafted free agents who are hoping to make a 53-man roster somewhere before the final cuts are made. We thought we'd take a quick pause and review what we've seen to date and see what, if anything, all of this might tell us about the season to come. We also have some interesting injury news and concerning news for a couple of teams. Brian O'Leary and Shane Brennan with Conor Brophy here. And alongside us, making his Irish NFL Show debut, is Barry Adams. Barry, we'll have the cap on the way to you, your first cap. We'll see and hear a lot more of Barry during the season on the Thursday Night Football Preview podcast, among other things he'll be doing with us. Barry, it's great to have you. Give us a quick intro there. Confess your shame now. We can see the terrible towel in the background, so everybody knows where your allegiance lies.
Yeah, well, I'll tell you what, Conor, I know how those rookies felt the weekend, stepping onto the field with grizzled veterans and trying to prove themselves and earn a spot. But look, it's great to be here. And before we get into talking football, I think I've said to you guys in the past on different occasions, I've been listening to and watching the show for a number of years. And, I think especially in recent years, just the quality of content that this team puts out and the quality of the shows, the analysis that's done, the conversations that happen, the different perspectives, it's all just is really excellent content. And, I'm just really happy to be able to hopefully contribute in a small bit as the season goes on, and just can't wait to get going.
No bother to you, Barry, and thanks a million for that, and we're looking forward to it. But let's start with the Steelers then. We'll ride the hot hand here and get you involved up front, because pretty interesting outing in terms of different quarterbacks getting some time, getting some reps. Drew Allar looked good. And the thing about preseason games, I know we all have to manage our expectations here, and I was only saying to Craig when we were sitting here last week, I need to not watch too much preseason football because I get completely overinvested in undrafted free agents and guys who are never going to do anything. I was watching highlights of Jordan Vandenberg and guy called Loving, who's on an interior defensive tackle on the Bears, and thinking, Jesus, we might actually have solved it. This guy is the new Dexter Lawrence. He's not, but I mean, it doesn't stop you. But Drew Allar looked good. When you see a third round pick stepping up like that, making plays, making some good throws. Yeah, it's against second or third stringers. A couple of really good tight window throws. Mm-hmm. The reason Mike McCarthy is there ultimately is really to give this guy a rattle and see, can he work his magic on him. They've got Rodgers there to steady the ship in the meantime, but this guy could be the future.
Yeah, I think, look, probably the person who came out the best out of Thursday night is Mike McCarthy, because all three quarterbacks, all the three backup quarterbacks that played in that game played really, really well. Did a combined quarterback rating of 128.8, completed 27 of 33 attempts for 322 yards, and he threw 2 touchdowns. But Drew Allar really did stand out of the three of them. And he had a highest rating of 154.8, 253 yards, and he had 2 touchdowns and ran one in as well. So he really, really produced the goods. But I guess for anybody who's not familiar with the Steelers quarterback situation, as you said, Conor, we have Rodgers there as number one. Rudolph is there as that kind of perennial professional backup, and he's a steady hand to go to if we need him. But really, it's been the 2 young quarterbacks who've been the story of this off season. Like as you said, we took Allar in the third round of this year's draft, and I think he has a lot of the basic qualities that we're looking for a quarterback. But still is a project and still needs a lot of work, and probably isn't a 2026 option. He's more of a 2027 piece. Will Howard, who we took in the 2025 draft, and shout out to Tom McCormick, who was the Irish Steelers fan who made that pick in Green Bay, or announced that pick in Green Bay. And Will had a really unlucky experience last year because he broke his finger in training.
I thought you were going to blame Tom for cursing him because he was the one who pulled his card out.
No, but he wasn't lucky. He didn't get to take any snaps even preseason last year, so we really never got a chance to see him. So we essentially came into Thursday's game with two rookies, 2 players who'd never taken a snap in the NFL, whether preseason or otherwise, and both of them played really well. Howard had a great 2-minute drive at the end of the first half. Looked really competent. And really this offseason has become a referendum on Howard. I think everybody knows Allar's going to stay there. Everybody feels comfortable with Rudolph. But the question is, what's going to happen with Howard? Is he someone? Are we going to keep the 4 quarterbacks on the roster? Are we going to go with 3? I've gone through kind of 53-man roster cuts numerous times over the past few weeks, and I just can't see us keeping 4. So it's probably going to come down to how well Howard performs in the next 2 games to see if really McCarthy and the Steelers feel comfortable that he could perhaps be that backup to Rodgers.
While we're on the subject, Shane, of QB battles, 2 of the more interesting ones that are bubbling at the moment, obviously in Vegas, where we saw Fernando Mendoza take his first snaps in anger for the Raiders and looked good doing it. But, I mean, just after speaking in glowing terms about Drew Allar, you expect the number 1 overall pick in the draft to look the part, especially in preseason when he's not going to be particularly challenged by elite pass rushers or anything like it. But he did look good with the job of work that he had on. I suppose I was listening to Mike Florio talking about this, and I kind of agree mostly with the point he was making, although I'd cut the Raiders and Mendoza a little bit more slack than he was. He was saying, you drafted this guy with the number 1 overall pick. If he can't beat Kirk Cousins out to get that job at 37 years old with his best years behind him, then you shouldn't have picked him number 1 overall. I'd be inclined to give him maybe a little bit more rope than that, give him a few games. I don't think he necessarily has to beat Cousins out by week 1. But I thought, again, given what he was there to do, the touchdown pass, one of the touchdown passes was a short one over the middle, but it's one of those, like, it was an NFL throw to a guy who was covered, had to squeeze it in a tight window, great timing, perfect zip on the ball. You saw what you wanted to see if you're a Raiders fan from Mendoza.
Yeah, absolutely. I guess before we officially start, I've also formally welcome Barry to the team. Great to finally have somebody else who's an AFC fan on the squad. This 6-1 balance in favor of the NFC has been ridiculous over the last year to finally bring some equilibrium here. I think what's interesting when we are looking at quarterback performances in the preseason is, I guess it's worth remembering, the difference in the way offense and defense approach this, because if a quarterback looks good in preseason, then it's not necessarily a sign that they are going to be good in regular season. But if they look bad, well, you know they're going to be bad in the regular season, because defenses, as we saw with I can't remember one of the passing touchdowns the Steelers got against the Packers, where the wide receiver basically come in and there were 6 Packers defenders almost at a line, not one of them putting in that extra 10% to go and make the tackle in the way that you would see, I reckon, more in a regular season game. Defenses aren't playing with the same level of intensity in the way the offenses are definitely trying to get all of their emotion and the speed of their pass and the speed of their runs and the speed of their routes in play. So that does make a difference. But you're right. I mean, the question mark with Mendoza is not necessarily if he can beat Kirk Cousins, but when do you decide to make him the number 1 pick in terms of the long-term development of your quarterback? We saw
Shane, you and I talked about this before. I know there's lots of different paths to Jesus on this one, right? You know, you have the CJ Stroud path, you have the Jordan Love path, and everyone has their own different take on it. I liked what the Patriots did, and you and I talked about this before, where they saw the start of the season when they drafted Drake May. The first 3 or 4 games were an absolute gauntlet, and they didn't put him in for any of those games. They waited for that to pass, and by that stage, the expectations were lower, and then they slipped him out when it was a little bit safer to do so.
But the thing about what the Patriots did with Drake May is they realized that one of the weaknesses in his personal game, which was fixed by the time he gets to year 2, is the fact that when he ran outside the pocket, he was actually very susceptible to getting injured, particularly with head injuries. There's a couple of close calls. I don't think he missed any time. But they saw the offensive line he was working with and decided, excuse me, well, let's give him a couple of weeks to get used to the system before we put him into the deep end here. I think if you look at the offensive line and what the Vegas Raiders are working with, you have to remember how bad that O-line was last year. And saying, well, what's the smart thing here? Let Kirk Cousins take all the hits for the first 5 or 6 weeks and then try to find a way to put Mendoza in. The Bo Nix situation is very different. I can see Brian shaking his head there, and I think he's looking at the Bo Nix situation and thinking, nah, just put him in straightforward. I think that was a situation where the O-line was a little bit better. The defense is better, and that they weren't necessarily on the field quite as often running short plays. So I think what the Raiders would do here, I think will probably benefit more from a Drake May style thing in terms of how we're looking going forward. So is this a quarterback battle? I don't know. I feel like it's Kirk Cousins' job to have in the first couple of weeks, unless he ends up getting injured or something like that. And we certainly hope that isn't the case. But in terms of what we've seen out of Mendoza, It was clean. I think you still be able to use a fine bit of speed in his passing. It'd be interesting to see what happens if he's forced to scramble more, which I don't think he necessarily had a lot of time where he was really under pressure, where the pocket was really under pressure. Be interesting to see now coming into the preseason, and if he gets more time where he's really under pressure and trying to run away from those sort of big time hits. But I agree with you, Conor. Or at least I think I agree with you. I actually don't know if this actually is what you're saying. But
yeah, let's get our one agreement for the season out of the way. Let's do it now.
I think the best part from Mendoza was to sit down for the first 4 weeks, and nothing from the preseason has made me drastically change my mind on that.
Well, we are in agreement. Okay, let's bank that one. We can come back to that during the season. Brian, I was going to ask you about quarterbacks who like the look of the blue tent because Jackson Dart found his way back in there. But I also wanted to chat through, and Shane, I thought, phrased it really well, which was quarterbacks who look good in preseason may not play well in the regular season, but quarterbacks who you expect to look in preseason and don't, that's never a good sign. And I'm thinking Tua when I say that.
Yeah, I went to the trouble of watching that game late on Friday night going into Saturday morning. He looked absolutely shot, and I know it's very early in the off season, or sorry, in the preseason, and we're always conscious saying let's not overreact to what we're watching because essentially it's a very dumbed down version of the NFL and it completely changes and the gears shift once the season starts. But I don't know whether it was a combination of he's lacking in confidence because of the nature of how things ended in Miami, or the enormity of the concussions he's had, or the fact that the offensive line was absolutely a shambles. And every time he turned to even get the ball out there, he was under pressure continuously. You could see, and I know we spoke about it, the kind of continuation from Miami where these quick passes out, and he was trying to work that in with Bijan Robinson and Kyle Pitts, but nothing was working. And obviously we may or may not have seen the gift that's already out there where Michael Penix is kind of, tongue-in-cheek kind of looking at him. I don't know what he's suggesting. Is this really the guy that's going to start ahead of me this season? But I was very concerned, but I'm conscious they're playing, and it was against the stars of the Broncos defense, and in fact they were a great defense last year, and it looks like they're pretty much on par again to go again this season. So I'm conscious about being too drastic and overreacting. But the Falcons, having watched quite a bit of preseason, and there's a lot of content you can go through, the Falcons for me look like a team that are going the wrong way very quickly, and I was quite surprised by that because Kevin Stefanski for me was the right hire at the right time for a team in a division that's very much up in the air and there to be won, but it just didn't seem like there was any cohesion to that team, and I'm conscious it's one preseason game, but now I thought the alarm bells were ringing.
I just want to say one thing very quickly on Tua. As much as and look, I really love to hop in here and get the hot take and be like, Tua's cooked, that's it, just get rid of him. And you look at the quarterback room in general, even that meme going around now of one of the other Falcons players can look at him and be like, I think it was Penix, being like, Penix. Look, point out, was like, I'm being replaced by this guy. He only had 5 pass attempts. I think four of them ended up being towards was a Kyle Pitts, and but he only had 5 passes. He wasn't on the field that long. Now he didn't impress in those in that time, but it wasn't as if he was terrible for 3 quarters. So give him another preseason game and maybe something might click.
It was more the nature of the passes, Shane.
I know the one where he took the snap and then had to jump over it because he spilled it. I'm like, you should be warmed up to this by now. And it's not like, I know this isn't your first day of training. This is your first preseason game after months of training. So listen, I don't think the Falcons are going anywhere quick either. But just I don't want to go on the Tua Tagovailoa pylon yet. I'll wait till next week and then I'll double down.
Barry, the Cardinals pylon can continue uninterrupted though, because, and I'm really dating myself when I say this, but I remember back in the days when we used to, more innocent times when we used to play with our Star Wars figures, and I could never understand why some lads would be burying their guys in the dirt, and it's just a waste of a good toy. And sure enough, the Arizona Cardinals have done exactly that with Jeremiah Love. We were kind of sucking our breath between our teeth when they drafted him, going, like, he's wasted there. Please don't break him. And they broke him in preseason already.
Yeah, I think it was, especially when it comes to running backs in the preseason, you've got to be so careful about their usage. And to put him out there, I think he had like 11 carries, 14 total touches. It's a lot for a rookie running back. And to put him in danger like that, I think is just a little bit reckless on the Cardinals' behalf. I think we did see a few. You mentioned Jackson Dart earlier on. We did see a few players take some big hits, and it is good to see a lot of your star players or your first pick rookies out there to get a sense of what they're capable of. but you just got to be smarter about how you use them. And unfortunately, that looks like it. It could come back to bite the Cardinals. Yeah, hopefully, he won't be out for too long, but it's hard to know at the moment how long it'll take for that to heal.
But as you say, I mean, I've no problem with every team's in a different phase of development. Some teams are leaning a little bit more on playing their ones. Some teams with new head coaches, as would be the case in New York. Like, there's every reason why you'd be throwing Jackson Dart out there, because he needs to get used to a new offense, a new coordinator, a new scheme. All of that makes perfect sense, and you want to give him a couple of meaningful reps in preseason in the stadium with a crowd there, and with everyone in pads at least looking like they're going close to full speed. That all makes sense, but I cannot get my head around why you'd need 14 touches out of Jeremiah Love. That's not like hindsight bias. You're looking at that going, give him one series, hand him the ball 3 or 4 times, let him get a feel for it, and then pull him out of there, and away we go again. But it just the mind boggles. Shane, the other injury that I was looking at here, and there's a pre-existing condition here is Alex Pierce, which has not gotten any better yet. For Indianapolis, and they're now looking at signing Keenan Allen, who the veteran receiver from the Chargers, who's kind of in the waning years of his career. But you look at how the Colts have done business this offseason. They give Pierce a big contract, knowing that he was going to have surgery, and we're not entirely sure when he's going to be back. They let Pittman go out the door to Barry's Steelers, and now they're scratching around looking to pull a guy into the camp after roster cuts.
Yeah, it almost feels like the all-in nature of kind of the way that they approached the end of last season, with going for the Sauce Gardner trade and then giving the big contract to Daniel Jones. It's almost like they're running out of resources to try and move around. And there was a couple of areas that they've done quite well in terms of drafting and bringing in, building out that receiver room and tight ends in the last couple of drafts. But now with this thing with Alex Pierce, it feels like they're kind of walking a tightrope. And if your wide receiver room is got to start building up injuries already, and Alec Pierce being a huge loss, somebody I want to see in action by the time the Colts play against the Commanders in London in a couple of weeks' time, then do you then turn around and say, we're going to try and give Jonathan Taylor even more touches? And then how unsustainable is that going to be? So interesting one is to see what way they're going to try and worry about that. I mean, people, I think, thinking that, if Keenan Allen's coming in, and does that mean that they're probably more worried about Pierce than even that they're letting on in terms of, his injuries and all this kind of thing. But it's an unusual one. I think the Colts have a lot to prove, and are going to be one of those teams that are going to be very much dependent on the fortune of one or two players staying fit. We saw the difference in them last year, even when Daniel Jones went out. What happens if Jonathan Taylor even has 3 or 4 weeks off? Never mind a big chunk of the year. They're one of those squads that, just the nature of their depth, they're 1 or 2 key players away from slipping back and what's going to be a very competitive division this year. So, not a great one to look for from an Indianapolis point of view.
And while we're on that team, Brian, and directly to that point of teams that are vulnerable to 1 or 2 players getting injured, we saw that play out with the Chargers last year when they lost Rashawn Slater and Joe Alt along the O-line at just the wrong time of the season, and they ended up being pretty easy prey for Shane's Patriots in the playoffs as a result. They've now lost Tyler Biadasz, their centre, who, according to the report I was just reading on Roto World, looked in serious pain as he was carted off from training, banging the side of the cart in frustration and pain. That's not a picture you like to see. Now, we don't know at this stage. It's all speculation as to how bad that injury could be, but that's not what they'll want to see, given the O-line trouble they had last year. Fairness to the Chargers, that's something that they did address through the draft. They brought in Jake Slaughter, who was nominally penciled in to play guard, but played center in college. So it's kind of, in fairness to the Chargers, the right way to do things.
Yeah, this is more of a broader conversation around practices and training camp, because I was listening to a podcast today, New York based, and they were talking about the fact that now you're actually more apprehensive about your players in practice on a daily basis as opposed to playing in the games, the preseason games, because by and large, most players, in particular the 14 players, are quite limited in terms of the snaps to get. Their snap count is relatively low. But you can't legislate for injuries, in which we're seeing in camps. And I don't know, we're going to come to the Jets, like they've confirmed today that Brees Hall won't touch another ball, meaningful ball now before the season starts. He's out for a few weeks. You're going into these weeks and you're kind of praying that your best players come out of these camps, unscathed, and they're available for the season. But this Chargers piece just feels like it's a recurring theme, kind of like year in, year out. We're talking about how they can lift and shift players into various different positions. And I suppose they do draft around that. I was conscious of their offensive line and shifting players around, but it seems to be every year we're talking about how Justin Herbert is under pressure continuously because of the nature of the offensive line, which when they're fit are a very good offensive line, but they seem to continuously carry injuries. And here we are again today talking about a player that potentially could be a huge moving point in their season already because of a camp situation. And I don't think we're seeing the end of it. I think we're always it's inevitable we're going to see more injuries come the end of camp.
Before we wrap, Barry, just an interesting discussion point that we thought we'd get to that's pretty much fresh off the presses from Germany, where the NFL Commissioner, Roger Goodell, has done an interview and talked more emphatically than he ever has done about the possibility of a team outside of the US, an NFL franchise outside of the US. You would think probably London would be the obvious first destination here. This has been skirted around before. There's been lots of speculation around it, but the commissioner basically saying today that it absolutely will happen. Now, what has he not said? He's not put a timeline on it. He's not put a destination on it. He thinks it's an easy enough thing to say, but in practice would be very, very difficult to stitch into the fabric of the league.
Yeah, it is an easy thing to say, and as international fans that we are, it's a really exciting thing to hear, right? That they are thinking in that way, and they're probably having some real in-depth conversations around where that could be and what that could look like. And I obviously they've been moving in that direction with increasing the international games. I think it's up to 10 next year in 2027. So that they're obviously thinking along those lines, but practically, you'd have to look at the logistics of how would that team travel to games in the US. If there's some kind of East Coast division that they could be part of, maybe it would work. But there's logistically it feels like it's a bit away. Yes, but exciting to hear that it's been talked about.
Shane, on this, as Barry was saying, obviously we're seeing the number of international games expanded. The league and the commissioner have been on record saying they want to get to 16. So every single team will play an international game once per season. That may test the mettle enough, though. And I think probably Melbourne will be an interesting experiment as far as that goes. We were just talking about that with Brett Gosper, the NFL's head of Europe and Asia Pacific, in that there's the travel time, there's the distance, there's the time zones, and there's the fact that they're moving a key divisional matchup between the Rams and the 49ers and playing it outside of the US. Like all those things, the NFL does these things very strategically. And, we saw last season, for instance, and we spent a good bit of time talking about this time last year. It was obvious that there was something being thrown into the melting pot when we saw the Vikings play in Dublin and then in London in consecutive weeks. And we'd never seen a team before. We had seen the Jags play 2 games in London, but we'd never seen a team play 2 international games in 2 countries in consecutive weeks. And, just dipping the toes in the water is the way the NFL does these things. So I've no doubt that when the commissioner says, yeah, we will have an international team, he does mean it, but it will take a long time to get there.
I think so as well. I mean, the interesting thing about this is, I guess, sometimes when the commissioner would say this, I think people are like, well, when they want a timeline, they want a sense that it is actually going to happen. I'm not saying I don't believe him. I do believe that it is an aspiration. But as to why he keeps saying, and I think it's very much just a part of this, the wider way that the NFL is sort of trying to push internationally, and thinking about certain different markets. I mean, Barry was alluding to there the fact that we're getting more international games. They're going up to 10. I think the way the league works, it'll actually be 11 because it'll be 10 plus the Jaguars game in Wembley, which sort of falls outside that window, which is good news for us because it definitely means an increased chance of a game in Croke Park. But the idea of having a team or even a division, like I think the people are saying, if you're really, really expanding this far out, you'd have, maybe like a 4-team European division and another 4-team Asia Pacific division, which is the real sort of pie in the sky stuff. You're talking 20, 30 years down the line where that could potentially happen. Yeah. I think
and for context, let's not forget, this is the longest period in the history of the league where they haven't expanded. It's been 24 years, 24 years since the Texans joined the NFL in 2002. There's been no expansion since then, not one for other team added to the roster, which on the one hand makes you think we're overdue for further expansion. On the other hand, points to the inherent conservatism.
But I think that's a great point you mentioned there, because you look at the NFL, there's 32 teams, they're all in the United States. The Major League Baseball did 29 in the US. Hockey's a different story, and basketball works in smaller markets, but again, it's 29 teams in the US. There's nowhere else in America right now for the NFL, for NFL franchises who are trying to get better deals from the current stadiums to say, well, we can move to LA because there's already 2 teams in LA. So the international option just becomes a part of the bargaining chip. Even very interesting, we've got a lot of listeners in Florida. You see that people from Jacksonville Jaguars are saying last week that they're going to reevaluate their relationship with London. It seems like they're going to be playing a lot of games in London now whilst they're saying it's being rebuilt. But I have a funny feeling that based on the deal that was done for them to get a really big and exciting renovation for the stadium in Jacksonville, that they're like, here, cool the jets on playing more games in London, which then opens up the opportunities for potentially a team there, but potentially other teams playing more internationally. So look, I think we're all very much in favor of more games internationally. There's always going to be a conversation as to whether somebody like me would give up being a New England Patriots fan to be a fan of, the Dublin Harps or the London Silly Nannies or whoever it is that they end up setting up on this side of the Atlantic. There's still plenty of ways for this to go. Personally, I would like to see the NFL focus on doing some sort of minor league in the spring in Europe that could grow the game here, but also give us something to watch during the 6 months of the year when there isn't NFL football on. But it's very exciting that the international landscape, but that hunger hasn't gone. There hasn't been any backlash within internally in the NFL in terms of growing it, and it's nothing but good news for us.
And Brian, as Shane is talking, it brings to mind a point that Trey Wingo was making in his interview with Kieran Boyle recently, which is a great listen for anyone who hasn't heard that. You can check that out wherever you get your podcasts, as you will also find that Brett Gosper interview as well for more on this international expansion team. But the point that Trey Wingo was making is, in comparison to the other professional sports in the US, the chain has name checked there, whether it be MLB, whether it be the NBA, whether it be hockey. The one thing that the NFL has over all of them is scarcity. There's a huge premium on NFL games because there aren't that many of them. You're not playing a 162-game regular season like you are in Major League Baseball, where, don't worry, if you lose 20 games in a row, there's still another 140-something to play. That's the golden goose, and the NFL would do well and is very conscious of not wanting to kill it.
Yeah, you always talk about how limited, shall we say, in terms of, again, 17 games, you compare it to NBA, compare it to MLB. I mean, it's quite tight compared to those other leagues that go on for months and months on end, and teams are playing continuously day to day. The premium product, and we know from conversation when we're over stateside, even with Kieran, I think the Americans have accepted the plan and the strategy behind the league in terms of growing the game internationally. But I think there is a breaking point, and Kieran Boyle is always asking the question, when is that breaking point? I know Trey Wingo kind of addressed it in the recent podcast, but to take it, even if it is an expansion situation, I don't think you're in a situation where you can expand. One, there's been continuous conversations about, would it have to be a division? Conor, you're talking about essentially 4 teams. That's a bit extreme. Bear in mind, you just touched on there, 24 years since we've had one new team inclusive in the league. You're talking about a scenario where you could have 2 or 3 teams having to come in. I just don't see a scenario where you can have one playing here. There's all these other conversations around currency, exchange rates, tax, income. Players may not want to come and play in Europe with all due respect. Like you signed up to be an NFL player. I don't think you signed up necessarily to be playing and living and residing in Germany for 6 months of the year. I think it's a very different predicament. But again, we've been here before where we felt the NFL couldn't explore and find ways around these things, and they do. But I ultimately think we're a long way off that conversation. But it's a dangle, and I know what he's doing.
A final note worth mentioning here is that for the 32 teams that do exist, there'll be 22 of their games broadcast free to air on Virgin Media in Ireland. And I'm thinking back to when I started watching the NFL, I wouldn't be into the NFL if it wasn't available free to air as it had been when we were kids on Channel 4 as it was back in the day. And that played a huge part in getting me into it. A lot of people now access Red Zone free to air, and that's their entry level into it. So I think it's a brilliant thing to see those games being made available, and will probably encourage a lot more people to start watching the game, and good luck to Virgin Media and to all connected with that as they make that happen. A smart move, Shane, by the NFL to sign that deal.
Absolutely, and this is something that we've spoken to Henry Hodgson about this the last couple of years, not only when it comes to the Dublin game, but in terms of expansion of interest in Ireland, that free-to-air television was a big part of it, because not everybody has Sky. It's funny, Virgin is great in terms of, I was watching Formula E, when you're just flicking through it and you end up getting into it now, so it's almost like a new sport to cling on to. I think what's nice about this is they're showing 9 p.m. games on Sunday, which is a perfect window to try and get people to cling on to. Not something I've said to anybody in my various trips to the Virgin Media studios, but I'm sure once the NFL season starts, the fever will start spreading in there very quickly. Interestingly as well, I mean, I think there's 22 NFL games to be shown free to air this year. I think next year there will only be 35 hurling and football games combined, Sean, free to air. So we're getting more, just as much NFL as we are GAA. We've got half the year. Give it to us for free, and we can watch it. And it's definitely going to be something great for us all to watch on as well. I'm just interested to see what way to do it in terms of what games they select to show. Should be interesting.
And if you're a disenfranchised GAA fan on hearing that, you can contact Kieran Cudahy on Liveline. That's a great topic of discussion there. Brian, a quick point from you before we wrap.
Yeah, I also think it benefits us and other various different Irish NFL teams, outlets, Conor, because what are the NFL after and what are the Virgin Media after? They're after new customers, essentially, that want to pick up the game. And I believe if people are gradually getting into the game, they're going to explore other avenues to listen to the game. They want the Irish feel about it. So I think it also helps. It benefits us in the long run to maybe capture a new audience as well.
Yeah, here. And if you like what you see and if you like what you hear, please do remember to like and subscribe wherever you're finding the Irish NFL show. Barry, congratulations on making your debut. We'll be talking to you soon.
If you like the show, please take a moment to rate, review, and subscribe. It really does help the show to grow. Thank you for listening.